Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for being here. My name is Emily Lyons, and I just want to say that nothing really qualifies me to be giving this presentation today, other than I have been involved in higher ed for more than 10 years. I've been teaching as an adjunct instructor, and before that as a graduate student. So I've seen a lot and experienced a lot in that time. So this presentation is something that I submitted to this series kind of out of frustration in a way, that I wasn't seeing more resources kind of responding to the student needs in the midst of the pandemic, and in light of the protests for the movement for Black Lives that we've seen throughout the summer. So what I've created just kind of is a reflection of an evolution in my teaching, moving, more in an abolition direction over the past few years. So that's what I'm here to share with you today. So I guess I should say before we get really into it too, that my goal today isn't so much to provide you with tips and tricks to be more abolitionist in the classroom. It's more just to invite reflection on institutional mindsets that I think a lot of us have internalized, and to start questioning those and figuring out, how can I start breaking those down in my own teaching. And my focus is really going to be on teaching today, just because we don't have a ton of time. So related to what I just said, I have this quote from Bettina Love, who's an abolitionist scholar and activist and educator. This is from her relatively new book, and she says, "Abolitionist teaching is not a teaching approach. It is a way of life, a way of seeing the world, a way of taking action against injustice. It seeks to resist, agitate, and tear down the educational survival complex." The images I have at the bottom of the screen here are on the right and left are from the graduate student strike at University of Santa Cruz that you, I'm sure, are aware of. And in the middle, it's an image from protests in Louisville for justice for Breonna Taylor. So just to give a little bit of background, so the modern abolition movement, a lot of activists and scholars tie that back to the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, especially his book, Black Reconstruction in America. And the project of that book is to illuminate the way that African-American contributions to American history have been systemically whitewashed in the wake of the abolition of slavery, and how that's been done deliberately to further white supremacy, to continue excluding Black people from full participation in civic life. So that's kind of a foundational text for this modern movement. It's a movement that is, created by Black and Indigenous folks and people of color, and led by them. So some of the things that the abolition movement emphasizes are praxis, so bringing together of theory and action, coalition building, so really bringing together people from all walks of life, and valuing the different skills and knowledge that they bring to making stronger communities, to create safer, healthier communities. And so the means to that is abolishing the prison industrial complex and the carceral state. I could go on and on about what those are, because we don't have a lot of time. I won't get into that, but you can look that up. And I'll give this quote from Angela Davis from her book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, where she says, "Positing decarceration as our overarching strategy, we would try to envision a continuum of alternatives to imprisonment, the demilitarization of schools, revitalization of education at all levels, a health system that provides free physical and mental care to all, and a justice system based on reparation and reconciliation rather than retribution and vengeance." That book is a good starting point for I think, learning more about the prison industrial complex and the carceral state. So at this point, I will just invite you to take a moment to write down a policy that, whether you're an educator or whether you work in like a supporting role, or whether you are a student, what's a policy that students are expected to adhere to? What's the purpose of the policy? How is it enforced? So I'll ask you to just do this on your own. This is for reflection, and we'll come back to this later. And we've got images of W.E.B. Du Bois and Angela Davis here. One thing that I wish that we had time to go into, but we don't, is kind of the ways that institutions of higher education like participate in the carceral state and the prison industrial complex. So I would really recommend this book, We Demand, by Roderick Ferguson. I'll just outline some of the things that he says in that book, detailing like how diversity and inclusion, like while we sort of assume that these are projects in these spaces that resist the carceral state, that resist like ongoing repression and discrimination of marginalized people, that they contribute to that in some ways. And so he details the history of that. He talks about how this kind of comes out of reaction to student protests in the Vietnam era, and he talks about how the creation of these diversity and inclusion like entities on campuses promote. They sort of set up like diversity and inclusion as institutional goals as a way of like precluding student resistance, and it creates students as sort of adversaries to the goals of the institution. He describes that this is part of the university project of advancing neoliberal agendas that values like corporate ties over like actually serving communities, and particularly marginalized people. And interesting to note is that the expansion of like these administrative units that are dedicated to diversity and inclusion go hand in hand with like the arrival of like law enforcement, like dedicated law enforcement units on campuses. So that's part of the same move to, as Ferguson says, to kind of criminalize students. So anyway, I don't have time to go into that in more detail, but I want to focus on how we sort of reproduce these institutional values of kind of creating students as these like oppositional subjects, how we reproduce that in the classroom. So some of these things that I call the carceral mindset are reflected here. So there's this idea that some students are like more fit for education or deserving of education than others. And that's especially the case in like STEM fields where it's sort of a sink or swim mentality. It's like either like these are hard disciplines and either you are suited for it or you're not. There's this idea that students like need to be disciplined in order to be like prepared to learn. And so it sort of suggests that they arrive at college like not having agency, really, like not having a sense of discipline. It sort of sets up students as being kind of the adversaries of the teachers, that this idea that they're resistant to learning, that in order to get students to learn, you need to manipulate them. Basically, you need to coerce them. You need to threaten them with penalties or with just various kinds of punitive strategies. There's this confusion also between like discipline and teaching. Like I think a lot of people who have this mindset, like it comes from a well-intentioned place that I'll talk about more, but it's this idea that like this is how I show that I'm a good teacher, by being a disciplinarian. But I think that those are really separate things, and we need to find a way to separate those things out. So we also have this mindset that if students are failing to meet expectations, it's like a failure of character on the student's part, that it doesn't lead us to question whether like the pedagogy is flawed or whether there's other barriers in place. So it just continues this idea that like, you know, the students are like need teachers to basically like mold them. So some of the ways that we enact this on students are by doing things like attaching grades to participation and attendance. So basically, if students, you know, don't attend class regularly, then that has an effect on their grade. By imposing penalties on late assignments. Using things like, there's all kinds of that you can use to sort of track student progress, just to keep tabs on like, are students really doing the reading? You know, how much time did they spend on this assignment? You know, are they turning things in when they're supposed to? There's like plagiarism detection software like Turnitin. So these are all ways that we like monitor our students, and it comes from a place of like just not trusting them. So zero tolerance policies, like when it comes to things like plagiarism or, you know, like late work or whatever, these policies that there's like no way to come back from them once you've crossed that line. These are things that happen. And then just when you are in conflict with a student, like say you have a student who's, you know, plagiarized an assignment, punishing rather than trying to figure out, okay, like why did you do that? What, you know, can we figure out like what's going on there? So these things are harmful because students are basically coming from like from all different, you know, situations into the classroom. So this limits, it really harms students who have like different learning styles, if they have learning disabilities, if they just are not the type of student who is good at like memorizing and information, if they're not good at writing, you know, just like these things don't really help students with diverse learning styles to get ahead. It doesn't address the fact that there are these systemic barriers to access that are embedded in the system. It creates more barriers for students who may, for instance, like have less access to technology. If they have, if they're low income, or if they are housing insecure or food insecure, like those students who already are facing access issues then have to work even harder to make up for the difference. If you're doing things like creating like accumulating penalties, like for like repeated late assignments or repeated like missed attendance, it creates this cycle of academic debt, so that there's no way that students can kind of get out of that once they fall into it. And it reinforces this idea that students latch onto, I think, really early in their education, that they're just not cut out for school, that they're not good at certain subjects, and lastly, it discourages them from seeking support. So the students who are already, you know, that the system is kind of built to exclude because it's not historically for these students. That includes students of color, queer and trans students, disabled students, and I would include in that, students who have learning disabilities or physical disabilities or are chronically ill or struggle with mental illness. Undocumented students, low-income students, first-generation non-native English speakers, and students who have to care for family members. Because, of all of these systemic things that they're facing, if they're working outside of school, then it's going to be harder for them to attend class. It's going to be harder for them to turn in their assignments on time because they're splitting their time between work and school, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to outline some justifications for this. So I really commonly see this one. It's this confusion of like educating students with disciplining students, and that it comes from a place of thinking like the purpose of the class is to prepare students to like be professionalized and to get by in the real world. So if you don't impose discipline on them, then they're not going to be able to like cut it in professional settings. And a problem with that is it ignores the fact that like a lot of students are already working, and they're already, some of them working full-time or even more than full-time jobs while they're at school. So this idea that they're not ready for the real world ignores the fact that they're already in the real world. There's kind of a similar mindset that is that, well, things are unequal and that is bad for students, but that is the way it is and there's nothing we can do about it. So by holding them to tough standards, it's preparing them for that reality. So it's like, it's not going to get easier for students who are marginalized, so they might as well be held to tough standards so that they can get used to that. Again, I think that's really, that's flawed thinking. It doesn't look at the root of the problem. It doesn't question, well, why are these things the way that they are? So yeah, I won't go through the rest of them. You can see them there. But there's also just the idea, though, that like we as teachers may feel like we don't necessarily want to do these things, but we don't see other options. And I think that that should invite us to look at like what are the ways that the institution is like oppressing us. What are the ways that the institution is not supporting us as teachers, rather than than making that a problem about how to deal with your students. So to begin breaking down these ways of thinking, I think you need to start by determining like, what are you doing in the classroom? Are you there to discipline your students, or are you there to educate them? What does that mean? So I think I just have these very basic questions that I think we need to ask ourselves repeatedly over and over. What is our reason for being here? What is supporting, what we're working towards, and what's holding us back? So again, like I said, differentiating between educating and schooling. Schooling is like, just that disciplinary structure. Sort of related to that, confusing like assessment with learning. There's all sorts of ways that we evaluate like what our students have done as far as work, but that doesn't always necessarily give an accurate picture of like what they're learning. I'm running out of time. Anyway, so just quickly, I want to touch on recognizing the humanity of your students, I think is really what it comes down to. Recognizing that they come from like all different situations, and we're here to support them. We're here to work with them, not against them. So I guess at this point, we can split into breakout rooms. And I'd like for you to discuss the policies that you came up with earlier, and so I would like you to question, what is the value of these policies? How does it help students? How does it harm students? And like, is the purpose of it educational in nature, or is it disciplinary in nature? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I can't see what's going on. So, oh, actually, no, I need to do that. Okay, I will leave those up for you. And I know we're running out of time.
Okay, so at this time, I'll go ahead and send everybody to their breakout rooms. Does that sound good, Emily? We're good to go, Emily.
Okay, so I know we're running into the Q&A a little bit, but before we get into discussion, I just wanted to quickly wrap up. So an abolitionist classroom, as opposed to a carceral mindset classroom, would be one in which students and teachers are working together toward like a shared goal. So students and teachers are in solidarity with one another, instead of, in this adversarial relationship. And I've just outlined some things here. I would be happy to like talk through what these mean, or what these look like in more detail outside of this. But some things just to touch on are that, among other things, like the abolitionist classroom makes space for ambiguity and flexibility. And it recognizes that, beyond just like inclusion, education should be about joy, and like it should include, rest when you need it, and like this sense of mutual care for yourself and for one another. And I have this quote here from Jeffrey Morrow, who wrote this essay that really resonated with me back in February on his blog. And he says, "Expel cop shit from your classrooms. Expel cop shit from your hearts. We are educators. We are not cops." I wanted to end with this quote from Corita Kent, who is somebody who inspires me as an educator. She was a nun and an art teacher at Immaculate Heart College. And this is from her book, Learning by Heart. She says, "As teachers, we try to participate in the process of empowering people to be the artists they are. And as artists, we accept responsibility to create, to realize our immense powers to change things, to fit things together in a new way. As artists, we work every day. We make our own lives every day. We care for our family every day. It is this hard daily work, this creative process. But it is also greater than personal. We are asked to care for others as well, helping them to create their lives as we were helped. Our work is global. We are asked literally to help make the countries of the world fit together in new ways. We begin this making, of course, in our own selves, our homes, our own country, but we can't stop there. To dream about painting and to not also work at it doesn't ever bring about a painting. To dream about creating a new world that is not teetering on the edge of total destruction and not to work at it doesn't make a peaceful world. So it is important that we are creative people, working daily on the greater picture as well, bringing to it all our skills of imagination and making. We make this larger picture also with hard daily work by specific actions. All our creative skills are needed to keep up this tremendous work, and we work on it so that we and our children may have a world in which to fulfill our reason for being here, which is to create." I'm going to stop screen sharing now. Oh, just quickly, I believe this will be sent out, but I have some resources that I've compiled, my email in case you would like to continue talking about this, and then I have like a lengthy works cited. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I guess we can start with Q&A. So Laura or Trinity, I'm not sure how this is going to work, if people are going to ask questions in chat or just speak.
You're welcome to unmute your mic if you have a question. You're also welcome to share it via the chat function. I think there's one question in the chat so far that was asking who the author was. I believe that might be for the last quote. I think people are also willing to share the policies that they discussed in their breakout rooms as well.
Yeah, I would like to hear that. The author was Corita Kent. I'll put that in chat.
So it looks like we have multiple questions on the chat. So one is, how can we make learning and engagement more fair?
So I think that asynchronous education is a better option than trying to do synchronous online. And I'm speaking specifically just in the pandemic context. I'm doing a hybrid modality right now where I'm meeting with my students online, but they're not required to attend. I don't expect them to. So I'm delivering all the content that they need to complete the work online. If they can show up to the discussion, that's kind of a bonus. I'm also recording those sessions so that students who aren't able to attend can go back and look at them, and they can view the transcript if they want. So it's not perfect, but I think it tries to address like different needs of different students. I know a lot of students are really struggling to afford to be here right now. So a lot of them are working during class time. For them, like having college be delivered mostly online means that they're spending more of their time working than they would otherwise. And, I think they're doing that out of necessity. So that's why I don't require them to do that. So anyway, just to respond to that, I think that there's a lot more to be said there, but I think that asynchronous is a better option. I'm not sure that I would say it's abolitionist exactly, but I think it's better than synchronous. So I see this other question about test proctoring. This is kind of outside the realm of my experience. I've stopped giving exams in my classroom. And I mean, I teach in the School of Information. I teach social media strategies. So it's maybe a discipline that sort of doesn't necessitate exams as much as maybe other disciplines do. But I think that if I were, in the past when I've done tests, I think that like allowing extra time, allowing open book, I don't know that there's really a pedagogical need for making students memorize stuff. I mean, depending on what they're going to be doing with their degrees, presumably they're going to go back and refer to, the resources that they've used to learn. So I don't know, like, if tests are where they're not allowed to kind of access resources are really what that's accomplishing exactly. Let's see. I know I'm not going to get to all of this, but I'm just going down the line as much as I can. It appears that we see education as competitive, which is flawed thinking, steeped in exclusionary mindset. success is not only generated through competition. Yeah, I would agree with that. There's this idea that I think especially in STEM, there's sort of this idea that you have to outperform, that you have to like be better than other people in order to get ahead. And I don't know why we can't. That seems to reflect like a structural problem with the institution, that there's a myth of like, scarcity. I think that there's not room for everybody. I think that we could make room. So one of the policies discussed was no etiquette, no tolerance, plagiarism policies, requirement to keep cameras on. Yeah, I've seen this. I've seen emails about this, and I just I don't know what the purpose is. Well, I guess I can put myself in the mindset of that. It's very alienating, I think, to be trying to teach to a screen and to not see the faces of your students. But I think that it's important to ask two questions. Why are students, what are students' reasons for maybe not having their cameras on? I mean, I know a lot of my students are like in their dorm rooms, they have roommates around, they might be at home with family. There's a lot of just practical reasons to not have screens on, but also it's like, is it really causing a problem? I don't know that it's causing a problem. I know that there's a concern that like if students have their screens on, how can I know if they're actually paying attention and participating? And I guess I would say that you kind of need to let those things go. You can't enforce all of that all the time. I think that is sort of like a waste of your time and energy. So let's see. Policy I discussed in my breakout room is an attendance policy. A lot of instructors have become more flexible about attendance and student engagement. I'm curious how you might think about this approach. So in my classes, in my in-person classes, like prior to the pandemic, I stopped taking attendance, which is sort of different from not requiring attendance, which is what I do now with my hybrid synchronous and asynchronous teaching. I think that it's important to like allow students their agency, and they're able to decide like when they can be in class, when they cannot be in class, and whether they have valid reasons for that or not, I mean, is kind of it's not for me to judge. So I think that not necessarily tying performance to attendance. There are other ways to do that. Like I have students present in my classes, and there's some flexibility around that. Like I don't compel them to if they have like real strong reasons for not doing that. But they definitely miss out on stuff if they don't attend. And I know that we're out of time. Yeah. So again, I'll just put my email here. So if you would like to continue discussing these concepts, I know this is like a really short introduction and really inadequate in a lot of ways, but it's just a start. So if you would like to continue discussing later on, please email me, and I would be happy to set some kind of discussion group up. So thanks for joining, and I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate having you all here.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was wonderful. It's nice to see a lot
Thank
of
you.
inclusive leadership cohort as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. I'm going to sign off, but yeah, I really, again, I really appreciated being able to do this, and so I hope we can keep this conversation going and do more. So,
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily.
thank you. Okay, bye.